I'm Jimmi Langemo. I'm here in the studio in downtown Northfield, Minnesota, and I'm really excited about the talk I'm about to give. I love the town of Northfield. I love what it's trying to do, its aspirations for its citizens, for its students, and for its tourists. And so I'm really glad that today I get to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is how to live a more meaningful life while helping others live theirs. A little bit about me. I'm a business person. I'm also a consultant. I work with other organizations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, human resources, business strategy, and business operations. I'm also a spiritual person. I'm ordained as a lay priest in the Zen Buddhist tradition, and I'm son of a Lutheran minister. I'm also a musician. I play guitar, harmonica, mandolin, banjo, and I'm in a band called Jimmy and the Band of Souls. All of these things are going to come up in this talk, but it will all boil down to this, and that is about how to live a more meaningful life while helping others live theirs. That teaching will result in a more successful business. It results in creating environments in which people feel safe, welcome, and wanted. It results in experiencing a transformed life, a fulfilling life, a rewarding life. To me, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, everybody benefits. And I really mean that everybody benefits. For all we know, we have one life on earth. Now that could sound high pressure, but we're also eternal souls. So we live just a short time in this tent, camping on the banks of the human experience before moving on to our next adventure. And while we're here, our job is to learn how to love, to experience the source, to live a meaningful life while helping others live theirs. And it should be the most enriching and rewarding life possible. But for too many people, it's not. It's not safe, it's not caring, it's not loving. And for most of us even, we don't live really the fullest life we could. We're distracted by the cares and worries of the day, seemingly unconnected to the oneness and beauty that's all around us. So we have some work to do. But work is healthy, so that's okay. All the spiritual teachers tell us to focus within. Then they ask us, once you've done that work, to reach out to people, sharing love, grace, and compassion. So in this talk, we'll talk about this and how it applies to our lives, how it applies to our business, how it applies to our families, our friends, our lives, wherever we happen to be, no matter what we're doing. Whether we're working in a business or living at home, whether we're hanging out with friends, having a serious conversation with somebody, or just driving down the road. Now, for those of us who want to wake up and live a more conscious and fulfilling life, there is no time to waste. So let's begin. To solve a problem, it's essential you understand root cause. The problem I'm talking about is the problem of not living a fulfilling life. The problem I'm talking about is the problem of suffering in this world. The problem I'm talking about is too many people not living a life that's not just full, but where they feel safe, wanted, and welcome. And the root cause in this case is serious, and it's subtle, and it's subversive. However, the solution is more natural and simple than you might think. That doesn't make the work less easy, but it does make it less complicated, and that's encouraging. Now, the journey was and always will be going within yourself to find the truth. So let's start here, and let's start with a conversation about our biases. So what is a bias? When someone has a bias, they're either leaning towards something that they have an inclination for, or they're leaning away from something they have an inclination against. It's that simple. That's really all that's happening. Kind of overcomplicate a lot of ideas, and that's one of them. And biases just exist because human beings are messy. We're often motivated by desire and dislike, what we want, what we don't want. I don't know what time of day you're watching this video, but just think of your day so far. How long since you've been awake, and how much of your day could be summed up as, I want this and I don't want that. Like literally, how much is it? 50%, 75%, 90%, 100%? So much of our day is caught up in what we want and what we don't want. And because of this wanting and not wanting, we're vulnerable to having biases for some things and being biased against other things. Being aware of how we are motivated is the foundation for someone who wants to live a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. In the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, two kinds of biases, or there's actually two terms, to be more specific, around biases that are often used. One is unconscious bias, the other is implicit bias. I'm really interested in behavior change and culture change, and I find those terms, as accurate as they might be, not helpful when it comes to behavior change or culture change. The reason is because it takes a while to kind of wrap your head around the concepts. With unconscious bias, I have to think through, okay, what does that really mean? How do I make the unconscious conscious? How do the biases get into my unconscious in the first place? Why don't they start in my conscious, right? All these questions come up. I got to wrap my head around it. It takes too long. Implicit bias, just by definition, is kind of a slippery term in the sense of implicit can mean it's built in, mean there's nothing I can do about it. Well, that's not the case with biases. The other thing is it can mean implied, kind of like you're coming around at it sideways. But I'll guarantee anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of a bias, it does not feel like it's just kind of coming around to the side. So for that reason, I don't use those terms. I've come up with a new term. That term is conditioned bias. When I thought of that term, I was wrestling with trying to come up with something where as soon as I say the term, I point to the problem and I point to the solution. Because I like things simple. Not that we're simple people, actually we're not. And not that life is simple, it definitely isn't. But a simple model and a simple teaching that can be applied almost universally means I don't have to wrestle all day with what the heck this concept means. Instead, I can work on how do I practice it, and so I can get better at it. So with conditioned biases, it starts with this idea, more than an idea, it's really this understanding that I'm born messy. I'm a messy person, but I'm not born with biases. I am born with the tendency to be motivated and driven by what I want and what I don't want, but I'm not born with the biases. I'm taught those. I learned them through experience. I'm conditioned to have specific biases. I learn those biases by being taught by the people I trust. And why wouldn't I trust them? It's my parents, it's teachers, religious leaders, it's my friends. I'm surrounded by a culture that reinforces those biases through media. Again, religious leaders, politicians, movies, musicians, all sorts of people reinforcing how I feel about people different than me, how I feel about myself. We get sleepy in this contextual crib of culture, no longer seeing the world as it is, but rather seeing the world as we are taught to see it. Our biases become accepted. Our biases become internalized. They become normal ways of relating to others. They become normal ways for how we see the world. In fact, we'll even go as far as to say how I see the world is the right way to see the world, as opposed to how other people might see the world. Our decisions and our thinking patterns, clouded by the lens of our biases, reduce us to making decisions without consciously thinking. The behaviors we cultivate based on these biases become habits, meaning the behaviors become rote, unconscious responses to stimuli within a situation. Culture also rewards us. When we act in certain ways, it rewards us, and it penalizes us in other ways when we perform in certain ways. So this plays to another aspect of our vulnerability. We want to belong, and the pressure to conform is quite compelling. So we do whatever we can to fit in. So conditioned biases then are those biases that we are taught, that we internalize and make our own. But when we use that term, conditioned biases, the following becomes apparent to us. One is we identify the problem. I'm a messy person. Let's just sign up for it. Right? We identify the root causes of our biases. I have biases because I'm often motivated by desire and dislike. I'm vulnerable to adopting culturally conditioned biases. But as soon as I say that, I identify the solution. If I can become aware of my conditioning, I can remove that bias. Which means then we take our power back. How I've been conditioned, how I've been made to kind of sleepwalk through life, doesn't have to be that way anymore. We can wake up. Conditioning isn't a part of me. I can do something about it. I can recondition myself. I can become a fully aware, active agent of change in my ecosystem. And that goes right back to living a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. Because now the biases I possess no longer get in the way of how I treat other people. They don't get in the way of the decisions I make or the things that I say. Rather, instead, I'm wise to them as they arise in me. So what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking is all considering an entire situation. I work holistically. I work wholesomely. I work with compassion because those things aren't getting the best of me. So now back to unconscious bias. Since I've been doing this work since 2004, this is what I have learned. Whether a bias is conscious or unconscious is directly related to the degree of self-awareness the person has cultivated. If you haven't worked on yourself, of course they're unconscious. You're not even thinking of them. You're sleepy, right? You're in this comfortable little cocoon. But if you start working on yourself, you start waking up to these things. At first it can be shocking, embarrassing, alarming. But as you make it safe, and we'll talk a little bit about more of that in a bit, but when we make it safe to explore these biases, you find you look forward to seeing them. You look forward to learning from them, and you get a sense of satisfaction when you set one aside and put it to sleep. So, this is the thing we need to do. How do I make it safe to explore my biases? Let me tell you a story. One day, I was working in Memphis, Tennessee, down at the Civil Rights Museum. If you haven't been, highly encourage you to go. I was working with a group of people from a corporation. Their headquarters are based in the southern United States. Now, when you get real about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you start getting deep with the issues, you come face to face with your values. For most people, then, when you come face to face with your values, you start talking about your faith. Doesn't matter what faith you have. That's where it goes. Values and faith. With this group of people, since we were from, they were from the southern United States, they came face to face with their Christian faith. They were wrestling with some ideas. They were really struggling with coming to terms with how they might be contributing to an environment that's denigrating to women and people of color. Even though the data showed, through turnover, employee engagement scores and whatnot, exit interviews, etc., that in some ways the environment wasn't inclusive. They were really struggling. Like, I could see them earnestly wanting to make it work, but unwilling to go into the space of exploring their biases. Now, I'd been working on this for a while. I'd had my same problems. And it wasn't until I had an experience with someone where he really asked me to face my biases and made it safe for me, where I really got to understand how healing it is to approach your biases and make it safe, put it right on the table so you can explore it. And so in this moment, some questions came to mind. And I said to these folks, I said, hey, do y'all ever lose your temper? Yes, they said. I said, all right. Do you ever make fun of someone or gossip? Yeah, they said. I said, are you ever selfish? Yes, they said. I said, all right, one more question. Do you ever lie? Yes, they said. I said, well, if you're willing to admit that you do all these things, why won't you admit that you've done something racist or that you've done something sexist? It all comes from the same messy muckiness of our human condition. What's the difference? You know what the answer was, right? It's the way our culture has approached such things as racist behaviors or sexist behaviors or heterosexist behaviors is it's not as safe to say, yeah, every once in a while I tell a lie. I shoplifted as a kid, whatever, right? Whatever those things might be, much easier to admit than I've done something racist or I've done something sexist. So we talked about that if it all comes from the same messiness, the same muckiness, just like we explore, why did I shoplift, or why did I lie, or why do I gossip? If we do this same exploration, certain questions will come up. Where did that come from? What motivated me? Maybe on top of that, we'll ask questions like, is that the kind of person I want to be? Is that how I want to be experienced? And so we had this wonderful conversation of making it safe for these men and women to explore their biases. Where does it show up for them? And so I learned in that moment that this is the trick. For each one of us who are interested in living a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs, is really exploring, where do those things come from? When I laugh at that joke, when I look at a resume and I'm pausing about whether or not to include this person as one of the candidates I'm going to interview, what's making me pause? Now, one of the things that makes people pause is guilt and shame, and that's worth exploring. I know some people will ask me, a stray white man, to feel guilty for things that happened 100 years ago. I'm not really sure that's an appropriate thing for me to feel. I wasn't here. What I do need to do certainly is acknowledge what was the truth of what happened 100 years ago. What I do need to do is take responsibility for respecting the fact that because of things that happened 100 years ago, I may benefit in ways that other people don't. And I need to take responsibility for the things that are happening right now. Where I have influence, I want to make changes so that it doesn't happen again. But I can only feel guilty for something I've done or not done. I can only feel shame for something I've done or not done. And that guilt or shame, it's really an important piece, because for some of us, including myself, guilt or shame made me feel small. Guilt or shame made me feel unworthy. I can guarantee, even though I've never met these people, that Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass, and all these other folks who struggled so hard for civil rights, I can guarantee none of them want us to feel small. None of them want us to feel unworthy. In fact, what they want us to do is live a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. So you know what I'm going to do with that guilt? You know what I'm going to do with that shame? I'm going to invite it in, and I'm going to learn from it. Those mistakes I've made, those things I've said, those embarrassing things I've done, those shameful things I didn't do when I could have done something. I'm going to learn from those so that the next time something happens, I've already kind of processed what mistakes have I made, and I'm going to get back on the saddle and do it again. Just like anything else in this world, right? Riding a bike, learning how to play guitar, anything. The mistakes I make, I'm going to learn from it so I get better. We need to, in this culture, learn how to make it safe to explore our biases. Whatever tradition you subscribe to, there are some wonderful teachings that Jesus has in regard to this. One of them is in Matthew 7. He says, why would you take the speck out of your brother's eye when you've got a plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, pull that plank out of your own eye first so you can clearly take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus, in just a few sentences, points out everything I've been talking about when it comes to biases. He's holding up the mirror and saying, look inside yourself. Take care of all that stuff, that messiness. Be aware of all that messiness, that plank that gets in the way of you doing things, of seeing things. And once that's clear, now you know what to do to partner with someone else with whatever problem that they've got. Notice the language I use there. I didn't say help somebody. When I'm helping somebody, that can mean I'm sympathizing with them or feel sorry for them or I think they're victims. Most people are not. Most people are looking for opportunity. Most people are looking for a level playing field. There's a great quote that says, if you're here to help me, I don't need you. But if you understand that your liberation is tied to mine, we can work together. Hold on to that when you're thinking of how do I help other people live a fulfilling life. I'm not helping anybody. In fact, most of the time, I'm helping myself. So that's biases. Here's another thing that's curious about us as human beings. We have an other problem. Can't do that with a piece of paper. We have an other problem. What that means is, besides being motivated by desire and dislike, we tend to see things in a world of duality. Us and them, you and me, mine and yours, this and that. We see this separation, this illusion of separation, without understanding that actually this creation is much more about interbeing. This creation is about interdependence, not independence. The things in this world, this guitar, this suit coat, the camera I'm looking at, the wonderful fellow filming this thing, they're distinct but not discrete. And it's really important to notice that because it changes our point of view of our role in this world, as well as when we talk about living a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. Let me give you an illustration. I've got this guitar here. This is a Goodall guitar. It's made in Hawaii. It's beautiful. Now it's a guitar, definitely. Right? You can hear it when I knock on it. This is a guitar. There's no mistaking it, and it is a real thing. Solid wood, metal, all that stuff. Let's take a little closer look at it. It's got a spruce top. So at some point there was a spruce tree somewhere that got cut down. There's a rosewood back and side, so somewhere there was a rosewood tree. There's an ebony fingerboard here. And this is maple along the sides as trim. So 4 different kinds of wood went into making this guitar. Not to mention the metal strings, the metal frets, the metal tuning pegs, the plastic pick guard, the plastic bridge piece here. I mean, really, at the end of the day, this is it's a guitar, but it's really kind of a combination of a lot of different pieces that have been warped and manipulated and glued together. It's amazing that it even sticks, holds its shape, right? Now, if we look even closer, we can't see it with the human eye, but if we look even closer, we'll see it's really just made up of cells. You get really right down to it, all we're seeing is all that's really here is space. As electrons kind of swing around and orbit and vibrate, it's really just space. You have to telescope really close in to see that. As you telescope out, a hard guitar. So that's one way of looking at the guitar. The other thing is about this guitar is, just sitting by itself, it's a doorstop. It needs me, or somebody like me, to actually make it an instrument. This guitar's got nothing to brag about. If it wants to make music, it's got to have somebody like me. And I've got nothing to brag about, because if I want to make this kind of music, I need something like her. And it doesn't end there. You know, what we're both really dependent on is the air around us. And the fact that air can act as both a particle and a wave is essential to what the two of us want to do together. I need the particles to vibrate so I can create airwaves that move along toward your ears so you can hear the music. So, man, at the end of the day, where does this guitar begin and where does this guitar end? We can go all the way back to the spruce tree, who cut it down, where it grew, the sun that was shining, the rain that fell on it, how many years that spruce tree grew. We could talk about whoever the craftsperson was in Hawaii that made this, who shipped it over to Minnesota. The cat from the Garrison Keillor show, Prairie Home Companion, who originally bought it, had it for a number of years and then sold it at the Podium. And then the Podium, little guitar shop that used to be in Dinkytown, sold it to me. I've had this for about 20 years. Where does this guitar end? Where does it begin? And we can say the same thing about anything that we can touch or knock on. Where does Jimmy begin? Where does Jimmy end? Well, who knows, right? What we can say is the names for, like, Jimmi Langemo is a useful term, because now when you say Jimmi Langemo, well, you know where I am. You know me. You know how to point to me. But here's where the problem comes in. Words are just postcards from reality. They can point, they can describe, they can illustrate, but they are not the thing in itself. And that's where we get tripped up. There's an other problem because we see things as separate from us when there actually is no separation. Another thing Jesus says, you know, is he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, as yourself, that can mean love your neighbor as yourself, meaning love people as much as I love myself. Boy, that's a learning journey. That's a whole other topic, right? How do I learn how to love myself? The other piece is, it's as same as, like as we are one. Love your neighbor as if we are one. Imagine how different our politicians who subscribe to that faith would behave if they understood that teaching. Now, love your neighbor as yourself is not a Jesus teaching all by himself. Many religions and philosophies have similar teachings. If we all understood, love your neighbor as yourself, how different would we treat each other? How different would we even see each other and see the problems that are showing up are really our problems? That those children are our children. That community is our community. How different would we see the world, and how much more could we live a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs? So we've talked about biases. We've talked about another problem. There's one more. A place for everything and everything in its place. What it is we use names, concepts, comparisons, categories, labels, all these things to understand our world. And that's helpful. Just like I said, words are postcards from reality. The trick is when those concepts become the reality itself. So for instance, let me tell you the story of the platypus. The platypus was discovered, right? First seen by Europeans in the 19th century in New Zealand. People drew this platypus and sent pictures back to England. Folks in England thought it was a hoax. They thought it was like our version of the jackalope. Then people said, no, this is the real deal. This is a real thing. It's got fur, but it's got a beak and it lays eggs. And I've seen we've got some kind of toxin that it can sting you with. What a crazy creature. It just doesn't fit. Now listen to that. What a crazy creature. It doesn't fit. What doesn't it fit? It doesn't fit our categories. It doesn't fit our genus and species. Or it doesn't fit the way we saw God created the world in 7 days and everything's in this neat little order. Pick a tradition, any tradition, we've got too many boxes in them. The platypus is sitting back saying, y'all are the crazy ones. Y'all are the crazy ones thinking this is how the world is. Well, the world isn't like that. I am doing what I've been doing ever since I started doing it. Ever since I started being, I was my old platypus self. Y'all are the crazy ones thinking things have to fit into a box. Now that's a funny story in a way. Well, actually it is. I think it's really funny. I think it's even funny we have to call it the duck-billed platypus, to separate it from all the other platypuses out there, the rammed horn platypus and the scaly platypus. But where it gets really serious is look at how we use words and labels to describe the things around us. Words matter. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, but think about this. Words matter. For instance, what comes in your mind when you hear handicapped person, disabled person, cripple, or person with disabilities? Look at all the things that handicapped person evoke. Cripple, well, all the things that evokes, the dehumanization, the subhumanization of those terms because of the meanings associated with being handicapped, disabled, or crippled. As opposed to a person who happens to have disabilities, a person just with disabilities. They are still a person, a sacred being that, for all we know, again, it's the only life on earth that person will have and shouldn't be the most fulfilling and wonderful and enriching life possible. So why would we use labels and terms that dehumanize or subhumanize that person? Why would we tell jokes that make that person, even in our heads, even if they're not in the room with us, make them seem less than or odd or not fitting? Let's explore this a little bit further. There was a test done by Darley and Gross. Darley and Gross filmed a girl. She was filmed in like a housing project, and some college kids were given a one-sheet description of this girl, mainly that she lived in a housing project and that her parents were uneducated. Then they also filmed this same girl playing it, say, like in a nice suburb. Different college kids were given a one-sheet description of this girl, in which the college kids were told that this girl lived in a really nice neighborhood and that her parents were college educated. Now, those college kids who saw those two different videos saw the same video of this young girl being asked questions. And they were just like math questions and history questions and stuff like that. So she answered some questions right, some questions wrong. Now, the college kids were asked to assess what grade level she's at. The kids who saw the housing project video said that the girl was at the upper third grade level. The kids who saw the nice neighborhood and the college educated parents said she's almost at fifth grade level. Same answers, same video. Look at the different point of view those college kids had about that girl. Another study. This one was done by Rosenthal and Jacobson. In this study, they told teachers that 20% of the kids in their classroom were bloomers, meaning they were ready to have an intellectual jump this next school year. The people in the study just randomly picked the students. The students did not know this was going on, but the teachers were told that this group of students were going to be high performers. The year continues. At the end of the year, the students are tested, and those kids scored 10 to 50% higher in an IQ test than their peers. The only difference was the teachers had been told how to think, how to believe, how to see these kids. Look at what language does, how we are told to believe, how we are told to think, what we are told to see matters. We need to wake up to how we have been conditioned, because how we have been conditioned changes the way we see the world and see ourselves, and it separates us from reality. These studies are great examples of that. So just imagine, right? You hear a phrase like she's from the hood, or she's a typical blonde, or he just got out of jail. You hear those terms, what comes into mind? Look at all the stereotypes that show up. What races show up for you? What else shows up for you? There's an old Zen koan called Temper. If you're not familiar with Zen koans, they're short little stories Zen masters teach their students. to help them understand reality and help them wake up to what's really going on. In this story, a fellow comes to his Zen master and says, I need you to help me with my bad temper. When I get mad, I punch holes through walls, I break things, I scare my old lady, I scare my kids because I yell and I shout, I just need you to help me. The Zen master says, well, show me this anger of yours. The guy says, well, I'm not angry right now. And the Zen master says, well, if it was a part of you, you could show it anytime you want. If it's not a part of you, why are you letting it rule you? Now, the moral of this story is one to really take to heart, because some of us really need healing in this space. Look at how that fellow had interpreted, labeled himself, I have a bad temper. I am bad-tempered. How many of us as kids were told we're not worthy, we're lazy, we're irresponsible, right? How many of us? How many of us carry that through up into our adult lives? Maybe into our 40s, maybe into our 60s, maybe into our 80s, continuing to carry those messages with us. And what this Zen master, what this koan is trying to point out is that is not who you are. If it was, you could show it anytime you want. It's a conditioning. Become wise to your conditioning, let it go, and recondition yourself into something else. Can you hear the good news in this? Can you hear the sense that as soon as you become aware of your conditioning, how you live a more fulfilling life while you can help others live a more fulfilling life too? Another similar koan is, there's these two monks walking through the woods and they come to this river, and it's been raining and it's muddy, and there's a woman with a silk kimono on and she wants to get across, but obviously she can't because of the mud and water. So one of the monks picks her up and carries her across and sets her down on the other side. The two monks continue on through the night till they get to the next temple. That evening, the other monk says, what the heck were you doing? We're not supposed to talk to women, let alone pick them up. What were you doing? And the first monk says, yeah, I set her down quite a few hours ago. When are you going to set her down? Every time I tell that story, I got to laugh a little bit because it's kind of funny. But it's also, I mean, look at the story there. How that other person is still carrying that with him. So think of like, what is it you're carrying? What are you holding on to that keeps you small, that keeps you feeling unworthy, that keeps you from seeing people around you as just other people around you? That whatever race they are, whatever gender they are, whatever sexual orientation they are, whatever religion they are, whatever it is, those labels don't define them. They are human beings, and we are siblings, all of us trying to just figure it out. No separation. Yes, distinct, but not discrete. Here's how funny our mind works. There's these two monks, this is another Zen koan. These two monks are arguing. They're watching a flag flapping in the wind. One monk says, the flag is moving. The other monk says, wind is moving. Hui Neng, who's a well-known Zen master, he walks up to them and says, your mind is moving. This is the whole thing I'm talking about. Because this is our minds at work. As we get conditioned to see things certain ways, believe things certain way, we no longer see reality. But if we just take a step back and notice the inner workings so that we can see it before I make a decision, we can see it before we say anything, we can see it before we act, and be wise to how we're being motivated. I remember once I was coaching somebody because I do some executive coaching. And this fellow was having some tough time with productivity with his team. He said, I just wish I knew what was motivating them. And I said, I wish I knew what was motivating me. You know, you're the leader, right? Let's start there. What's motivating you? How are you creating the environment where people are productive, right? What are you doing as a leader? Like, focus here first. The journey is always here first, because we make it all up. We make it all up. Even the idea of race, completely made up, not supported by science, not supported by anything. We made it up. We made it up because some people wanted to rationalize their absolutely heinous behaviors. That's the truth of it. They wanted to rationalize cruelty. They wanted to rationalize it, hiding behind what they thought, behind philosophical arguments, religious arguments, twisting religious teachings, perfectly good religious teachings, perverting them so that they could take advantage of other people and make all the money that they wanted to make and have all the power that they wanted to have. Now, how do we learn from that? How do we learn from that so it never happens again? It all starts right here, understanding what our biases are. It starts right here, understanding when am I seeing an other problem. It all starts right here when I start really seeing when am I putting things in boxes, when am I labeling things so that they're fixed, right? It's like a bug collection. You fix something, and you fix like a moth or butterfly. Well, it's not a butterfly anymore, right? This is a corpse. I am fixing a corpse. It's no longer living, breathing, dynamic. It's dead. And that's what happens. This is what as good as happens when we label things. They are no longer that dynamic, flexible thing like this guitar, right? All the things we learned about this guitar. Organically moving in and out, interacting with the creation around it, dependent on that creation around it. Because here's the last piece. Biases, another problem. We fix things with labels. We're also creatures of habit. Dr. Wendy Wood, she has a book called Good Habits, Bad Habits, and there's another book called The Power of Habit, whose author I'm going to forget right now, but that's fine. You can look it up. The Power of Habit, both great books. Dr. Wendy Wood has done a number of studies around habitual behavior, and she has found that 43% of the behaviors that we do as human beings are habitual. Now, some of these behaviors are the things you might expect. You wake up in the morning and you brush your teeth and you make some coffee. Someone sneezes and you say, bless you. Or you take the same path to work every day, or the same path to the grocery store. Those are habitual behaviors. But there's something else going on. I have suspected since I started doing diversity work again back in 2004 that how we deal with stress and how we deal with conflict are often habitual behaviors. And Dr. Wood's work is validating that hypothesis. What I have been observing when I see other people dealing with diversity issues, their willingness and effectiveness in stepping into this space is often dependent on how they deal with stress and how they resolve conflicts. And guess where they learn that? From the people who raised them. The adults around them as children, watching them how they cope with stress, how they resolve conflict. If you lived with two adults in your house, how did those people deal with stress? When there wasn't money to be had, how did they deal with that? How did they argue? How did they fight? Was it healthy? Did it burn clean? Or did somebody get the silent treatment? Or was there a hole punched through the wall? Or was there a lot of yelling? Or were they all just sort of sequestered away so the children never saw anything? So you never got to see what was going on behind the scenes. I will tell you this, that it is worth exploring. Ask yourself, how did the people who raised me deal with stress? How did the people who raised me resolve conflict, and how is that affecting me today? And how are those habitual behaviors? Now, a habit works like this. A habit works around three things. You need a cue, meaning something happens, or something happens that stimulates the behaviors. So there's a cue. And then you have a response. So there's something you do. You wake up, you brush your teeth, and then you have, at the end of that, some sort of reward. So you feel healthy, right? Because you've done your personal hygiene stuff. Or you've had your cup of coffee, so you're starting to wake up. You feel good. Usually that results in some sort of dopamine release in your brain. Not always, but usually. So here's a bit of a story. I had this fellow, his name's Langemo. It's one of my mentors. I was telling him once about an argument I was having with somebody. And he said, well, Jimmy, what do you default to? And I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. He said, no, what do you default to in an argument? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, do you default to a place of power? Do you default to a place of ego? Are you trying to protect your turf? What is it you're trying to do? When you argue, do you get all big like this? Or do you default to relationship? Do you default to, if I'm having an argument with you, I want to make sure whatever we're going to do, if we're going to have a little bit of an argument right now, a little bit of a tussle, I want to make sure our relationship stays strong. He says, if you default to relationship, look how different your motivations are going to be, how different your behaviors are going to be. So now I look at this, the cue is so much in this habit, right? In the past, something happens that this hair trigger stuff that makes me angry. I get angry, I get loud, whatever. I'm rewarded because I won that argument. Now, cue happens. Do I even have to get angry? Most of the time, no. But just in case if I do, here's a different kind of behavior. It's calmer, not as loud, not nearly as scary, and certainly not violent. What's the reward? Relationships are stronger. That's when I feel satisfied. You see the difference in that? I'm nobody special. These are all things I've been taught either through hard experiences because of extreme failures resulting in a divorce, or having really good mentors around me, people like Langemo. But I've got to tell you, it's those kinds of learnings that help me understand the value, again, of how to live a fulfilling life while helping other people live theirs. And when we look at this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, where we try to make people from all paths, from people of all races, people of all genders, people of all religions feeling safe, welcome, and wanted, everybody benefits. So I remember when I used to work more in Memphis, Tennessee, we received 2 letters. One was from somebody's wife, and that person's wife thanked us for how much better their marriage is now. I was not expecting that at all, but how sweet it was, just how gentler and more compassionate he was living. And he was not just changing his workplace, but it was changing his home life. Another fellow called me once and he said, I got to tell you, Jimmy, he said, it used to be when I came home from work, my family knew I'd been to drink a beer or two to unwind, so nobody talked to me, He said, now on my way home, I'm asking myself, what kind of dad am I going to be, and what kind of husband am I going to be? And when I come in the door, I ask my wife how her day was, before she can ask me. And I sweep up my kids in my arms. I got to tell you, that was really emotional getting that phone call, because that's how it should be. That man's life, you could see it. His business was improving. Turnover was going down. That was awesome. It was what we were trying to do. Diversity going up, all that stuff. But look at how rich his life was becoming, how much more meaningful his life was becoming. And all he was doing was trying to live a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. He was doing that love your neighbor thing. Loving your neighbor as yourself. I don't know if he was Christian or not, but that was the practice, right? 'Cause it doesn't matter right that way. So I want to teach you one skill, and then I have one invitation for you. So if you're really interested in going deep with this, there's all sorts of things you can do, books you can read, all that stuff. But there's one thing you can try all the time, almost any time. There's this little meditation skill. Now this particular skill was, legend has it, devised by Bodhidharma back in the 4th century. He's the guy who brought Buddhism from India to China. It's a very simple meditation. Now usually he sat in front of a wall, but I'm sitting in front of a camera. But he was sitting in front of a wall. And he just sat kind of, if you can't really see, but my back isn't against the chair. I'm sitting near the edge of the seat. My knees are about shoulder width apart. My feet are flat on the floor. My neck is firm and my back is straight, so that I'm kind of alert sitting. I'm not slouching. One vertebrae is on top of another. My head is straight. My eyes are open. This is about mindfulness, right? I don't want to close my eyes. I want to be able to see what's going on. I rest my hands calmly, relax in my lap, and I just get kind of relaxed, you know? And then all I do is I just notice my breathing. I notice my breathing coming in. I notice my breathing going out. I notice it going in. I notice it going out. Nothing trippy. Certainly nothing new agey about it. It just is what it is. I'm just breathing. Now what I do is I'll notice now and then that my mind is kind of off somewhere. It'll go in different places, right? Then I'll just come back. And I'll just keep noticing my breath. Here's the magic of it. The nice thing about it is there's no chanting, no candles, no mantra, no anything like that. I'm not envisioning anything, so I can do this anywhere. I can be in a budget meeting. I can be playing with my kids. I can be doing whatever it is. I can be playing guitar, watching my breath, noticing what's coming up. The nice thing about it is now that I'm taking the time to just notice my breath, I can see when am I getting tense? Is my breathing down here nice and comfortable in my belly, or is it up here nice, all tense and anxious up here? Am I noticing when I had my hands nice and relaxed, they've now turned into fists, or that my brow is furrowed or my neck is clenched? I get to notice all those things. So before I act, because the body tells you before your brain does how you're feeling, if I notice that, I can start to tell, like every time I'm anxious, I'm breathing up here. Every time I'm anxious, maybe I'm making a fist. Your body will tell you. Everyone's got their own little tells that way. So the more you do this, your body will kind of tell you things. You can say, hey, I'm about to act out of frustration or out of anxiety or whatever. Let me just relax. So just relax. Let it come, let it happen naturally. The other things that'll happen is over time, you'll see themes, back to the cue, response, and reward, themes about when are you getting angry, when are you getting anxious. When the biases start showing up, it's absolutely amazing, at least in my experience, the threads. It'll be, oh my gosh, my grandpa told that joke. All this stuff will show up. It's fascinating. And now I get to make this decision. I just cut that thread. That thing that was making me act like a puppet, right? These are my habits. I'm just going to cut that thread. I'm a little freer now. I'm going to wiggle this a little bit better now. I just keep cutting that thread so that eventually I am not this sleepy, mindless puppet moving mindlessly through life. Instead, I am much more aware. I'm much more in control. I'm much more able to behave the way I want to behave so that the people around me sense this oasis of inclusion around them. So I invite you to meditate like that. You can certainly do it a few minutes a day on your own, but also just in the course of the day, you can do this, and it can be very, very helpful. It's a really easy skill to learn. You can practice it anywhere. By the way, when Bodhidharma is facing that wall, you know why he's doing that? Some people will say he's doing that because he's trying to cut down from distractions, but that's not the case. There's still like birds chirping and wind blowing and leaves rustling and all that stuff. He's doing that because in the heat of the moment, when you're sitting there and you got all this stuff churning inside of you, you'll say to yourself, there is nothing happening but me sitting facing a wall. Where is all this drama? Where is all this anxiety? It's happening right in here. It's amazing when you start waking up to how much our minds are working and confusing us and how fast it shifts. I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here. If you're familiar at all with the game of football, it's a really good illustration. So in the game of football, there is a one person called a quarterback who hands off a ball to somebody or passes a ball to somebody. There's another position called a wide receiver. That wide receiver usually stands on the far end of the field. And when the ball is given to this quarterback, the wide receiver takes off running, and the quarterback may throw the ball to that wide receiver. So imagine, if you will, you and I are in the huddle with all the other players. We need one score to win the game. I'm the quarterback. You're my star wide receiver. And I say, go do what you do. We're going to hike this ball. I'm going to get it. You run. I'm going to throw you the ball, and we're going to win this game. Ask yourself, how are you feeling? You excited, nervous, anxious? How are you feeling? We break up the huddle. You go out to the side of the field, and there's this big burly fellow who's all ready to knock you down as soon as the ball is hiked. How are you feeling? More anxious? Even more excited? Are you feeling crafty at how you're going to, do a little jig this way and a little jag that way so you can run past him? The ball is hiked. You run past that fellow like he's got concrete shoes on. You're wide open. I throw this perfect spiral to you, and it hits you on the numbers, and the ball drops on the ground. How are you feeling? Are you disappointed? Feeling defeated? Humiliated? You look up at the scoreboard and you say, hey, there's time for one more play. Now how are you feeling? Elated? Full of hope? How much time has passed? Maybe 5 seconds. Look at this roller coaster you've been on, this roller coaster of emotion. This is how our days go. Remember at the very beginning of this talk, I said, how much of your day has been spent, I want this and I don't want that. This little football analogy, it shows it, because this happens every Sunday in the fall and well into the winter. In just a few seconds, all these emotions. So what I've been trying to teach by pointing out our biases, by pointing out this other problem, by pointing out the categories and the labels we place on things in our habitual behaviors, that when you become wise to these things, you can uncondition yourself from the things you have learned and become the person you want to be, creating this oasis of inclusion around you. So that maybe for the first time today, maybe for the first time even in someone's life, someone will feel wanted, someone will feel welcomed, someone will feel validated. So my invitation to you is to take a few minutes. Find your North Star. Back in the day, and before there were the navigation instruments that people use nowadays, they used a North Star to navigate through choppy waters, through whatever, all the things they had to navigate through to get to where they wanted to go. So write down these answers to these 3 questions. What kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to be experienced? And what legacy do I want to leave? So what kind of person do I want to be? When I got through that divorce, I had to ask myself, okay, Jimmy, what kind of person do you want to be? Are you going to be this mess that keeps screwing up relationships? Or are you going to be the kind of man that can be a good partner? Be the kind of man that can be a good dad? How do you want to be experienced? This is when you write down in good, simple, concrete terms of when whoever I'm meeting, whoever I'm working with, whoever I'm playing with, this is the kind of person they're going to experience. And the legacy you want to leave is imagining that day, which hopefully is decades and decades from now on your deathbed, and you're looking back on your life, and not only you're saying, that was one heck of a ride, I'm glad I got to be in this tent for a little while, but everybody else around you is saying, I am so glad you were here. My life is so much better because of it. So what legacy do you want to leave? It's like making a different kind of will, right? Here's the thing you can take to the bank for you. You're here for a reason. You are sacred. There's only one of you. Before you were born, there was no one like you, and after you die, there'll never be another person like you. You are here for a reason. So wake up to how you've been conditioned. Wake up to those labels that have been placed upon you, or the way you've been told to see the world, and see the interdependencies that really truly exist in this beautiful creation of ours, and live a fulfilling life while helping others live theirs. I'm Jimmi Langemo. This has been awesome talking to you. I would love to hear from you, love to hear what you're thinking. I hope you have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
sunrise, the worst I've ever seen.